Hi everyone, it's We Deserve Better on YouTube, and I'm making a follow-up video to my previous video, why every progressive should vote for Joe Biden. And the reason I'm doing a follow-up video is because I've received quite a bit of feedback and quite a few comments in response to my last video, and I felt that based on the nature of the comments that a follow-up video is something I should do to clarify a few things. I feel that maybe some things that I was trying to communicate kind of got lost in translation, and the message got distorted because I didn't communicate it well enough. I didn't do a good enough job of, conveying what I was trying to convey in a succinct manner. I fell short in that regard, and I want to see if I can take a little bit of time here and give another try to conveying what I was trying to convey. Now, the first thing I want to address is that, in hindsight, looking at it, I may have come across as smug and condescending in the delivery, the way I delivered my previous video. I don't necessarily think that I said anything wrong, but I may have been insensitive and smug in the way that I delivered it, in the way that I said it. So I do apologize for that. I do apologize for using possibly a disrespectful tone, and in future videos I will try my best to do better. I'll do better next time. I'm gonna try to figure out how to use a better tone to communicate what I'm trying to communicate in a more thoughtful way. All right, so getting into the content here, the first point that I wanted to address is people have been telling me Joe Biden crosses my moral red lines. Joe Biden crosses the line in the sand that I have drawn, and because of that, I can't vote for him. Now, to some extent, I do think that this is a valid point. You have moral red lines. You have certain things that you just cannot tolerate, cannot put up with. That's perfectly understandable. We all have red lines that we just won't put up with people crossing, and if they do cross it, we won't want to associate ourselves with that person. We don't want to have anything to do with that person. That type of thing is perfectly understandable, but I think we're in the context of a general presidential election. Things aren't quite that simple, because making the decision as to whether or not to vote for Biden is not just about Biden himself. It's not just about studying Biden and his past and the things that he's done and the things that he said and his voting record and all that. It's about more than just that stuff. It's about both Biden and Trump. In other words, it's about examining the entire situation in front of us. It's about examining all of the factors and all the circumstances that we need to take into account, not just about focusing on Joe Biden. So that means taking a look at everything Trump has done, everything Trump has said, all of the things that Trump is trying to do to the country, all the things that Trump's trying to do to the world. These are all important things that we need to take into account. And we need to take into account the consequences of a second Trump term. And keep in mind, this is not whataboutism. I am not excusing Joe from all of the terrible decisions that he has made throughout his political life. I am not saying that we turn a blind eye to Joe's flaws and Joe's mistakes and Joe's bad decisions. All I'm saying is we can't turn a blind eye to what Trump is doing to America, to the world, and the sheer urgency of this particular situation. We cannot turn a blind eye to the differences between Biden and Trump, and we can't turn a blind eye to how much worse things are going to be under Trump than they would be under a Biden administration. Now, I strongly believe that voting for someone is not the same thing as supporting someone. They're not necessarily the same thing. As a progressive, casting a vote for Biden is done so for one purpose and one purpose only: to remove Donald Trump from office. We are not complacent, and we're not under any delusions that Biden is going to be a progressive or that he's going to go full progressive with his policies. It's just that we understand the urgency of the situation and the catastrophic consequences that a second Trump term would bring about. Here's an analogy that I think is worth considering. Let's say you have three options put in front of you. Either Adolf Hitler becomes president, Donald Trump becomes president, or you choose to let somebody else make the decision for you. I would say that in that particular situation, the circumstance would call for Trump to be chosen. I think any reasonable person in that particular situation would choose Trump. And it brings me a great deal of disgust to even say that, but to even say those words. But in this particular context, personally, that's what I would do, because you understand the two dangers in front of you, and you understand that there's no way to avoid them both. And one of them is guaranteed to become president, and there's no way around that. So to me, the choice is clear in that situation. Or if you don't like that analogy, how about this one? Let's say an MMA fighter comes up to you and says, I'm going to injure you in such a way that either I'm going to make you a paraplegic or a quadriplegic, or you can choose to just let me make the choice for you. So among those three choices, Which one is the most logical, sensible, reasonable one? To me, the choice is simple. You take the choice, you make the choice that brings about the least amount of damage. And you understand that it's not close. It's not close. Being a paraplegic versus quadriplegic, that's not a close decision. Those are not two close choices. The consequences of being a quadriplegic versus paraplegic are massive. That's a massive difference. So you choose the choice that brings about the least amount of harm, especially, like I said, given the fact that it's not a close race. It's not a close contest. One is clearly many times worse than the other. And you don't leave it up to someone else to choose for you, because that doesn't accomplish anything. That doesn't give you a way of avoiding the whole situation. You can't just say, I reject the whole premise of this and I refuse to choose. Because if you do that, you're still going to get one of those terrible choices shoved down your throat, and there's no way around it. So that's the type of thing that I would hope that everyone thinks about is, yeah, it would be great if we could realistically avoid a situation where either of these bad choices comes true. But the fact is, we just can't, at least not right now. There's no way around it. And on top of that, one is clearly much worse than the other. And there's no point in trying to pretend like that's not the case. All right, so another point that people have raised and brought to my attention is that the Democrats are not owed anyone's vote. They're not owed my vote. They're not owed your vote. They're not owed anyone's vote. And they have to earn it. They shouldn't get the vote unless they've earned it. Again, much like what I said with the previous point, it's perfectly understandable to feel that way. It's perfectly understandable to say that. And there is quite a bit of validity in saying that. There really is. But once again, the situation is not quite as simple as we want it to be. It's not the type of situation where we can avoid consequences just by refusing to participate in the situation and trying to distance ourselves from those two bad choices, because by doing so, we just empower other people to make the choice for us. Nothing truly gets solved that way. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make. Yes, it's true that Joe Biden crossed your moral red lines, and a lot of my moral red lines as well. And yes, it's true that Democrats are not owed anyone's vote. And no, they have not earned the progressive vote. But here's the thing. Even though all of that is true, even with all of those things that I just said, I still say, in my honest opinion, that voting for Joe Biden is the correct, most sensible thing to do in this election, for the reasons I just cited. Now, another thing that I think is important to keep in mind here is that about 80% of the U.S. voted Republican or centrist Democrat. So, in other words, roughly half the country is Republican, and roughly 2/3 on the Democratic side voted for Joe Biden. So, what that means is the majority of the country isn't progressive, and it doesn't agree with our point of view. So, I think we should be cognizant of that reality. And because of that, I think we should be mindful of the fact that Biden can't just alienate all of his centrist supporters by going full progressive with his policies. He has to hang on to his centrist support base in order to win the election. And it really is a catch-22, because the more progressive he goes, the more centrist voters and independents he might lose to Donald Trump. And the further to the center he goes, the more he alienates us. So it's a catch-22. He can't keep everyone perfectly happy. There's no way. So I'm not defending him necessarily from a standpoint of saying that he's a good candidate, a good progressive candidate. He's very far away from that. But I'm just pointing out that he can't possibly keep all centrists, all independents, and all progressives happy at the same time. It's impossible. To my next point, there are only two people who have any chance of winning the presidency: Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Let's be honest here. These are two awful options. So how exactly did America get itself into this mess? I would suggest that voting for the lesser of two evils is not what caused the current situation to come about. The real reason for this mess is decades of Republican, right-wing, laissez-faire, capitalist, trickle-down propaganda. Because think about it. Jimmy Carter was president, and he was a reasonably progressive president. I mean, he wasn't exactly Bernie Sanders or anything, but he was reasonably progressive. But after that, what happened? Ever since then, America has only had either Republican presidents or Republican-light presidents. And why is that? Why is it that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were centrists who completely ignored the left, basically, completely ignored progressives? Well, it was because of the effect that that propaganda had on the American public. The fact that that propaganda pulled the American public further and further to the right. So people who were previously left of center became center. People who were previously center became center right. And people who were center right now became hard right. So it basically shifted the whole political landscape to the right, to a very troubling extent. And then from there, Democratic presidents knew that they had to pander to the center and ignore the left in order to win elections or even have a chance of winning elections. So that's kind of the reason why that all happened the way it did. Now, there is some good news in all of this, is that there is hope. The way that we turn this tide is to work together as progressives to try to find ways of showing people that they've been sold a false set of goods. And we have to show them a better way forward. We have to show them the type of positive future that we could all have if we all embrace progressivism as a principle and stop letting ourselves get conned by destructive Republican propaganda. Now, before I end this video, I want to make one more point, and I want to put extra emphasis on this. I think we ought to be careful not to fall into the trap of thinking that there isn't a big difference between Trump and Biden. I truly believe that Trump is trying to turn America into an autocratic fascist dystopia, and I think it's fair to say that there is a plethora of evidence which points to that indeed being the case. All the while, Trump's policies will continue to make this planet less and less habitable for not just humanity, but for all forms of intelligent life. As bad as things may seem to be now, I assure you, they'll get way worse in a number of ways if Trump secures a second term. I'll be putting links in the description to corroborate what I've said here. Thanks for listening.